so for exact three.
Close the door.
No, I'm gonna leave the door open as long as it's quiet, just for air circulation.
Yes. Sealed orders.
Madam Chairman, if I want to interview me, of course I'm not going to send them away.
We're live. And we're gonna hear from the Vermont Communication Union District Association by CUDA. For those who are new, we set up communications union districts similar to fire districts. And their job is to get broadband out to their communities. And we now have a state board that oversees it, and we have state resources. And this is the first time, close to 3 years, we have been doing all of this via Zoom. I think one of the last bills committees knocked out was the CUD broadband bill. So I've got Ellie. Yes, come on up. I have you as first, but that's not what you have planned. Do you? Okay. You know the routine, just introduce yourself for the record. You can take that off, yes, it's very hard.
Okay, great. My name is FX Flynn, Francis Xavier Flynn. I am a resident of Queechee, the town of Hartford. I've been involved with EC Fiber formally since 2012, when Hartford appointed me to the board. But I had an interest in it from Halloween Day in 2007, when I first read on the listserv that groups were talking about EC FiberNet and ValleyNet doing something. They're going to come around to the towns. So it's been 15 years that I've been watching this, and for the last 3 years, I've been the chair of East Central Vermont Telecommunications District, the first district. And I'm here today to tell you folks that we are well along the trail to getting to the top of the mountain that the state legislature first identified this mountain, 100 broadband, back in 2014. And in 2015, the 23 towns that had an interlocal contract came to and were doing business as EC Fiber, came to the state and said, would you please pass a law that allows for the creation of telecommunications districts? And everything in the law passed except they changed the name to Communication Union Districts, CUDs. It's so Vermonty.
It's regulated by the puck, right?
Right.
Do a good job sometimes.
But the internet in Vermont has been plagued all along with this issue that we have low population, or we have difficult geography. So during the first phase, when it was dial-up, the big national companies were not providing local phone numbers. So what happened? Local groups stood up and started doing that. ValleyNet started to provide local phone numbers to get access to the internet. Same thing with SovereignNet, right? And then cable started coming in. That's your 25, 3 type service. Back then it was 10-1. And then the DSL came along, but that was only good if you were within 3 miles. So there was a situation for a while there in the early 2000s where downtowns had DSL and cable. So they had 2 providers. There was competition, but outside of that, you had dial-up, right? What became apparent to the folks where we lived was the same thing that was becoming apparent elsewhere, was that the cable companies were not going to build out. So we said, well, if we get together collectively like Burlington Telecom, we can do this. And we were pursuing that, and several things happened that made it impossible for us to participate in any kind of, to get our funding. right? The market collapsed. We were ready to get $42 million borrowed on Wall Street. Boom, 2 weeks before we were supposed to sign, boom. Then in 09, a lot of money came into the state for broadband. We couldn't persuade the state that we were an actual going thing, that we were going to work. And so the money went to VTEL, and they did a very good thing with a lot of the money. They ripped out all their copper and they replaced it with fiber. All right. They also had a great idea. Let's build cell towers and do cellular data for the rest of the state. Great idea. And I think we were all disappointed when that didn't work out, right? But it didn't work out. So meanwhile, EC Fiber is going boom, 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 and we're slowly building out our towns, but we're doing it with money that we're getting loaned in $2,500 chunks, and 4 or 5 years, $7.5 million. Then the CUD law got established. We became a district. The banks were happy to sell our municipal bonds, and we were happy to be able to pay back the local investors. And then we could really build a couple of 300 miles a year. And we're further up and now we're further up the trail. And now we have the CUDs. And and then what's happened is that in 2019, we came to the state and we said, hey, we need changes to the pole attachment. And the state was like, you're doing what? And okay, yes, you can have the pole attachment rules. Tell us more about what you're doing. And then the state was like, let's figure out how to get more CUDs started. And so we had the legislation in 2019. 9 months later, the pandemic hit, and then the CARES relief money came in. And then in 2021, the ARPA money, and the state put all that into the Vermont Community Broadband Fund and created the Vermont Community Broadband Board. And all these CUDs have gotten started. So now, boom, here we are. We are well up this trail, and we are going to be, all the new CUDs are going to be able to do in 3 to 5 years what it took EC Fiber 15 years to accomplish, right? And EC Fiber is just about done with its original 23 towns, all right? And I literally live in the last piece of one of the original 23 towns that's being built. And yesterday morning, when I was getting ready to go, the guy from EC Fiber showed up to figure out how my house is going to get connected to the fiber on the pole outside my house. So sometimes next month, I'll have that. And it's, it's very exciting. It's very gratifying, but it's been such a long way. Can you go to the next piece there? So what's the goal? The goal is, see these blue lines? That's where fiber is in the state, right? In order for the CUDs to reach all the 60,000 underserved and unserved locations, they're going to have to go everywhere. So at the end of the day, it's all going to be blue. And that's going to be a fantastic piece of infrastructure for the state of Vermont. And that is what the mountaintop is to turn this map into all blue lines. We have the next slide. So I think that the key takeaways are that Vermont's combination of low population and topography created internet deserts, that the Vermont's grassroots developed the CUD solution. This is a bottom-up invention. So it really works in Vermont. So, and EC Fiber, that's the successful feasibility study. That's the proven business plan. That's the legislature's model for delivering. And at the end of the day, it's not about the 60,000 addresses. It's about world-class broadband to the whole state. And I would note that the 60,000 number would be 75 or maybe 80,000 without what EC Fiber's already done. So sometimes, when the problem is described, there's a big part of the problem that's already been solved, and that gets hidden and overlooked. And also, because we are in the bond market, the folks who sell our bonds tell us that they're not going to have any trouble issuing a bond for a new CUD because we've laid the groundwork. They're not going to have 3 years of audited financials. They are going to, and plus the fact that they'll have so much grant-funded assets, that there'll be a real stake. Go to the last slide. And so anyway, EC Fiber today, these are our 31 towns. The green lines are all up and running. These gold lines here are in the town of Hartford, where I live, and that's starting to be stitched together. Some of those lines are actually already green. And then the towns of Windsor, the Philippines, Bradford, Newbury, Topsom, Corinth, and Washington, they will all be built this year and next year. And there's a few places around the borders where the pole sheds go and they come to an end. And if we don't build them, who will? And we're going to look at that as well. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation to you. Thank you.
Thank you. That has been a lot of work. Ellie.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Ellie de Villiers. I'm the Executive Director of Maple Broadbands down in Addison County, and I'm also the chair of VCUDA. So I'm giving a bit of an overview presentation today from VCUDA standpoints, just to contextualize the whole situation. Next slide. Okay, so about communications union districts, what are communications union districts? So some of this is repeat, I'll cover it relatively quickly. But CUDs formed as towns voting to join a CUD. And then the governance of CUDs is through towns appoints a representative and an alternate. And the voting representatives form the governing boards of each CUD. So most CUDs have executive committees. Several of us have executive directors, such as myself, that are actually staff that work. But the governance is sitting with individuals who are appointed by towns. It's very important. I mean, FX already mentioned that we're municipalities, and that public ownership, public accountability, governance, and transparency is really key. Also very important is we're committed to universal service. So we talk a lot about how expensive it is, and I have slides. It's very expensive to reach the end of the road. The last mile is always the hardest problem. This is our commitment. We don't have shareholders we need to worry about. We're not trying to extract as much profit as possible. We do need to cover the denser areas to support the less dense areas, but that's our mission. And then finally, we have all the CDs are engaged in public-private partnerships of different sorts. So different CDs have different models. Most CDs have a model similar to EC Fiber, where we focus on building infrastructure and we partner with a private company to actually do the network operations and customer service and billing and so on, because that's a big lift, right? And then, over time, some CUDs may transition to that themselves, but to start off with, that's the public partnership, private partnership. Next slide. So this is a map of the different CUDs throughout the state. So you can see we have representatives actually from many of those in this room here today, but just showing that we're distributed throughout the state, and here's where we are. Next slide.
That's my slide for tomorrow.
Okay, we can skip that one, please.
Wrong slides up.
Oh dear.
One moment, let me switch to Ellie's slides.
And Senator Ron Hinsdale is going to be joining us on Zoom.
Sorry about that, Ellie. That was a surprise, huh? All right. Here we go. This is Ellie's slides.
Yes, it is.
They came out of order to you, Ellie.
To see,
Well, I was fine until all of a sudden I didn't recognize the slide.
to see this
Oh,
though,
it is?
I mean, 2 years ago, these CUDs were starting up and were getting a desk in the library, or, I mean, this was really where they started
Oh,
with
didn't
nothing
advance?
and have come so far. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, I myself started as a volunteer. I think, let me just continue my narrative because I think I remember where the slides were going. So the next slide was talking about where we are now and also where we came from. So FX did mention, which is really important, that we have the benefits of, I think there's a couple before this. It's just giving the history of how we got to where we are now in terms of the funding that we have, and the fact that Act 71, which a lot of us, Act 71 of 2021, which created the Vermont Community Broadband Board and the Vermont Community Broadband Fund, this is sort of like our gospel, but at the same time, this was not birthed fully grown like Athena out of Zeus's head. This was actually the logical progression of the trail that EC Fiber started, and starting with starting with various other acts that created CUDs that encouraged and created some seed funding for us to get our initial feasibility studies done. So where we are now, this is actually quite an exciting year because this is where many of us are moving from having broken ground to actually accelerating the build.
So it is in this order. That's the first slide.
Okay, all right. Anyway, so FX mentioned broadband deserts earlier. So why do we have, so what causes broadband deserts? And the answer to that is basic, simple economics, that it costs approximately the same to build a mile, whether you have 100 houses per mile or 2 houses per mile. Not entirely, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but basically density drives business cases. That's the case with broadband telecoms globally. Vermont having rural areas being underserved, that is the exact same thing that happens elsewhere in the country, elsewhere in the world. So it's nothing new. And here's an example from really close to home. If you look at Montpelier and Barrie, that's Barrie Town plus Barrie City. The density of households per mile is nearly 400 in Montpelier, over 200 in Barrie, and then you get out to Groton and Peacham, right to the east, and all of a sudden you have 10 and 11. So and this also explains why if you look at Montpelier and Barrie, you have fiber here and you don't have it in the rural areas. So, okay, so CUDs are public entities that are building strong business cases. So we are municipal entities, we are public sector, we do have that transparency. At the end of the day, we also have to have viable and sustainable economic operations, businesses. So what does this look like? It looks like any other telecom business anywhere else in the world. You minimize your costs however you possibly can, trying to buy as cheaply as possible, keep your costs down, keep your overheads down, and then you build your service revenues. So that's through serving customers. And then obviously building through the denser areas. First of all, you need to build through the denser areas of town centers to get to the outlying areas, but also building in that density and picking up customers helps subsidize the areas at the end of the road, which are less economically attractive. So funding and financing, we are the extremely lucky beneficiaries of lots of grant funding, which is helping us get going rapidly and sort of hitting the ground running versus building slowly over a slower period of time. And then obviously the next thing as we reach the end of the grant funding, whenever that comes, is to finish building out our service territories, getting to the ends of the road with as minimal interest payments as possible. So keeping the debt service as low as possible is really one of our key challenges going forward, looking at different strategies for that. And then finally, the capital is directed to stakeholder benefits. So this is, again, the benefit of being public entities. So we have strong human resources. We have to have strong, capable staffs to make sure that we're able to do all of these things. We do have a lot of volunteers as well, but having paid staff that are actually in the business 24/7 is really important, because we don't sleep that much. And then, of course, the public accountability. And the profits are going to completing availability infrastructure, so getting to the end of the road, and then also working on affordability. So to the degree that there's excess money left over, we can specifically direct that towards those who need it most. So this together is how we bridge the digital divide. Next slide. Okay. So this one is just giving a little bit of a translation to what these speeds mean, because we live in this all day long. So we know what 100 means in terms of really good broadband versus 4 megabits per second down, sorry, yes, and 1 megabit per second up. This is just translating typical technologies that you'd see with these different speeds and then what it actually means. And so in particular, I want to focus on what we refer to as unserved and underserved, which is the people who have 4.1 basically speeds that are less than 25 megabits per second down and 3 up. So those are people who will, quite frankly, struggle to be able to watch this video, to watch this testimony without their video buffering. People struggle to upload files, large files. They need to transmit them. Plenty of businesses struggle with that, and people struggle with telework and different processes. Okay, next slide. And then this one here, this is just showing a map of across different CUDs, how many people are unserved, underserved. So the dark blue is the ones who have less than 4.1, and the green is people who have 4.1. So those together, that's showing just the number of addresses here. So there's still there's about almost 60,000 addresses that are unserved, underserved throughout the state. And then this is also showing the passing. So EC Fiber obviously has been at this game for a while. They have a lot of passings. Their numbers for unserved, underserved would be far worse if EC Fiber hadn't been around for 15 years. And as you can see, NEK Broadband is starting to add passings. Maple Broadband is starting to add passings. DV Fiber has a couple as well. Okay, next slide. So this is just talking again about bottoms-up grassroots support. So the town representatives form the governance of each CUD, and then the small CUD staffs are supported by hundreds of volunteers. So some of them are sitting on the governing board, those are all volunteers, and then many of us are lucky to have people who are devoting lots of volunteer hours above and beyond, meeting monthly or a couple times a month on committees to actually put in their time and their expertise. And I've personally been really just blown away with the level and quality of commitment and skills of the people from the different CUDs across the state. I've listed all these different skills here, but it's really important because I think when people think about CUDs as being largely volunteer driven and public entities, it's really important to note that we also have a tremendous amount of capacity, capability, and professionalism and skills. So we do know what we're doing, and we're quite good at it. And then we all consider ourselves part of Team Vermont, and CUDs support each other. Next slide, and this is just contact details. And that is it for me. I'm going to turn over to Krista Shute, who's the Executive Director of NEK Broadband.
At this point. Okay. Krista? Yes, feel free to sit.
Just 1 second, Chris.
No problem. So I'm really here today for a couple of reasons. One, to provide an example of a CUD and what we're doing, what it takes to build what we're building, and where we've come from. So I think the last time that I spoke to folks here was actually in. There's an extra 4 there. Oh, anyway.
Right?
Yeah, we were done by then.
We had one this morning that was January 31st, 2022. So it
We'll
seems
just
to
balance
be-
it out. Yeah. So I want to just give you a feel for NEK Broadband. We consist of all of the Northeast Kingdom, which is 55 towns and gores, plus the town of Wolcott. So we're both the largest CUD, but we're also the most rural CUD, as you can imagine. And what that looks like when you think about the what they put on the board with what translates to 4.1. There are over 10,000 people in the state of Vermont that don't have access to broadband that really can do simple things that most of us take for granted. Even if we're taking it for granted using, 10 down, 1 up, we're not struggling with that really slow 1 down, 1 up type of scenario. Of those, 40% of those addresses are in the Northeast Kingdom. We only have 10% of the state population. So it's a big issue from the unserved. And then you get to the underserved, and we have a sort of a more proportional share in that it's around 32% of those un and underserved addresses. And right now, the way that the money is distributed is based on roadways, and we have 30% of the unserved roadways. So it's just sort of a context of what we're looking at. We have completed our high-level design and a lot of our detailed design, which shows that to get to universal service, which is to get to every single address that's on the utility grid, is going to require around 2,800 miles. That's, in today's terms, approximately 196 million for our district. So it's a large number. Based on the 30%, we will receive up to $65 million from the current allocations from last year and the year before. And of course, there will be some upcoming funds. So 65 out of 196, we're currently at around 33% going into what will be coming down from the BEAD and infrastructure bills. So the funding pieces that are coming are still very important and things we need to address. So one of the, so I want to sort of give you an update on what we've done since last year. We have taken over the state fiber network. So there were 170 miles that the state built that we now own and manage.
That
That was built with the
The
Vermont.
Northeast Loopburg.
Yep, the
Okay,
Northeast.
that was also when I was first in this building. That's, okay.
I'm back
Quite
and
a
I,
long time.
yeah, I actually negotiated the contracts that made that 170 miles with Christine when she was with Vermont Electric Co-op. So we've constructed fiber to over 500 premises using a couple of grants from CARES, one that Memorial subbed to us, so we had additional funds they couldn't use. And we've also went after a rural business development grant, which also provided some funding. So now we're into the construction around the new pieces. And I'll get to that in just a minute because I'll use the next slide. But on this one, I do want to touch on where we're at and how we're growing. We have 51 board members and they all have alternates. So we have approximately just over 100 volunteers. Our primary working groups, besides our executive committee and finance committee, which are substantial and have great resources, are on affordability, communications, and technology. We have spent some time building our capacity, both in terms of office and warehouse space. We have a St. Johnsbury warehouse and office space, and we also have one in Brighton. It's a big district. So the second piece is that we've built a staff. So I came in as executive director when Christine left NEK Broadband for the Vermont Communications Broadband Board. Since that time, we've hired an accounting and grants manager. It's a super key position, a communications manager. And just this month, or last month in January, still this month, we hired an operations manager, a GIS specialist, and we have coming on board a logistics person who is actually coming in as an intern from the armed forces, and super excited to have him. He has incredible expertise that we are excited to bring on board. So the point that I'm trying to make is that we are building the resources that are necessary to get $196 million build done. We don't have to bootstrap it the same way that EC Fiber had to bootstrap it. We do have to make sure that every person that's on board is contributing to the efficiency and effectiveness of the project so that we're utilizing those public funds well. And we have a board that the fiscal responsibility is in the executive committee, because 51 members is a lot for a board, and that is about 8 folks. So if you want to go to the next slide. The purpose on providing this slide is to really just help you understand the steps that are involved in creating a broadband network. And so you really, first you need to figure out your map, your high level design, what are you really going to need and what's that funding? And so we spent time not only applying for our construction grants through the VCBB, we also applied for a $23.5 million reconnect application to the USDA. We should hear about that in February or March. The next step, and a lot of these steps all happen at the same time, so there are a lot of parallels, is the developing interest, right? And so that's the grassroots and that importance. We use Crowd Fiber. We have 1,700 pre-registrations throughout the district that have happened to date, really pre-marketing. The design and engineering, it's a critical step that we all do. We've all hired specific firms and have specific ways in which we're building it, but we're also working together so that we understand how the CUDs on either side of us. So CV Fiber and NEK Broadband work together closely. We work together with Maple, and we have conversations with Northwest and with Lamoille. For us, that's that sort of upper tier. We really want to make sure that long-term, we have the ability to make sure our networks are integrated and that we have the ability to find operational efficiencies as we get the project built. Right now, in the construction phase, no town wants to be on the bottom list of another CUD. So we all need to, roll out our construction. So we have $4.7 million in materials in our St. Johnsbury and Brighton warehouses. We pre-purchased 1,000 miles of fiber and a lot of electronics. We did that with the things that were seeing high price increases as well as 52 to plus week lead times. Make ready is the longest piece and it's the hardest piece. So that is going to
You might give some detail for the new members of this committee, what is involved.
super, thank you. So make ready is making the poles that you're going to hang the fiber on ready for that installation. And so that the poles are generally owned by the electric utilities, and sometimes they're owned by the electric and the communications utility together, so CCI and the utility itself. Most of Vermont has Green Mountain Power, which is privately owned and has an incentive to keep their plant updated because that's how they make their money. So their plant isn't too out of date. Then we have the cooperatives. Parts of their plant is definitely out of date. We have cooperatives like Washington Electric Co-op and VEC, Vermont Electric Co-op. And so we have all three of those providers. In addition to that, we have 5 municipalities inside of our district, 5 municipal electrics inside of our district. So the cooperatives and the municipalities, they have a harder business case in front of them for building the electric infrastructure and for keeping it up to date. And so there is a cost to the project and a time. Like if you think about Orleans Electric or Barton Electric, who has no employees whatsoever right now and it's being run out of VIPSA. Even Lindenville Electric, who's larger, they still have limited resources, and so the time that it takes can extend. EC Fiber used to average about $4,500 a mile. That's what you would pay to the electric utilities and to CCI to make these poles ready. We found that many of the cooperatives and some of the municipalities, more than 60% of their poles are not actually on the road. And so it's really expensive to do make ready when you have to get these big, huge equipment pieces that go out, or in some cases, horse-drawn pieces are still used. Everybody remembers that newspaper article, but so it's gonna be very expensive to get it out, and our pricing is more than double.
Can you tell the new members what's involved in make ready? What has to happen before you can do make ready, and then what? Because this has been one of the biggest
important part.
stumbling blocks.
Yeah. So in order to do make ready, what you do is you take your design and then you identify all of the poles in the order that they're going to be inside of a specific town along a route. So CCI is very specific about only processing within a town. And then you apply to the utilities for that. They then have a certain amount of time to respond to your application and to give you a ride out. So you go on a ride out, everybody goes in the same vehicle. So there's the electric company, the communications company, and yourself, and you negotiate what your costs are going to be for that make ready. And why do you negotiate? Well, there are basic rules that have to be abided by that are based on national code, and that's the National Electric Safety Code. And there are also our PUC 3700 rules, so 3.700 rules that dictate this process. And in that process, you might come to a crossing where adding another line to the road to meet the safety codes, because safety is really important. It has to be one of our top priorities when we're looking at it and doing this make ready. And then what happens is you have you negotiate, okay, well, we could raise this pole instead of replacing that pole and that will solve it, or there's no options and you have to replace the pole. So I'll just give you a couple examples. In Canaan, we have a run. 58 out of 200 poles need to be replaced in order to complete that make-ready run. And those poles are around $7,000 a piece to replace, plus all of the movement fees to move everybody.
And make ready is the rules. There's live electric wires up there. And there is a mandated spacing between wires and live wires. And if you got too many wires, then you have to get a higher pole. But if you're coming on, and I think you're about the bottom, everything else there may need to get moved up, which means you need to wait for the utility to send somebody out to move theirs up so that whoever's on there before you can move theirs up before you can put yours in.
And generally what happens is CCI likes to maintain the bottom row. And so we have primarily gone in at the top. And so we go in 40 inches below neutral and cross there. And that means we pay for everybody to move down, but it's the same exact thing.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's the same exact thing. So there is a process. We started our make-ready applications in 2021. And continued in the first quarter. We are just now have about 160 miles of those 650 miles of applications that are ready to be constructed. Aside from that, you've got permits and licenses. So you have to cross the interstate. You've got to get a permit from V-Trans. You have to do an underground. You have to get a local zoning permit or a wetlands permit or a number of other things. So there are a lot of, there's railroad permits and there are a lot of different. Okay, thanks. So there's a lot of different pieces to that. And so what I want to impress upon you.
Term make ready embraces all of what you just talked about.
Yes. So the other piece, the make ready piece is that they,
Cable's the easy
yeah,
part.
hanging the cable's the easy part. So they go out and they replace the poles, they move things around. I just want to impress that it takes time. There are a lot of different steps that take time. And we have a 2,800 mile build in front of us. If we do 400 miles a year, which is more than EC5 has done, we've never done in a year, that's 7 years. So are we pushing for 5? You bet we're pushing for 5. All of my contracts are based on 60 miles a month to try to push for 5. But I want to be realistic about the expectation of what it takes to get to every single one of those pieces. Next slide. So in terms of what do we need? I think the first one, which isn't on the slide, is continued support, right? We are doing this. We are creating public accountability. We are creating business cases. We are thinking with a long-term vision. We do have the ability to do this. And so as time goes on, it's important to stay the course that we've been on and continue in funding these public infrastructure bodies that are creating opportunities that would otherwise be monopolistic in an unregulated world. So that's just one thing to consider, is that this continued funding is critical.
We do not regulate cable.
No, there is no regulation of broadband. And so there are some interesting net neutrality things happening in California that we may consider wanting to do on the state level, because the FCC is broken at the moment with only 4 people, but that's for another day.
The FCC has 4.
Yeah, it's been a problem. So because Biden has not been able to get the 5th person in, it's been stalemated with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So there's not been much that's occurred there. The second piece is supporting workforce. There's $42 billion going into broadband across the country. It's going to get built everywhere. People are going to be hammering to find people. We need to retain the workforce that we have, and we need to develop additional workforce. So Christine is working on workforce development. But part of that is creating basically what's called a pay it forward fund that can work not just for broadband, it can work across many many types of, nursing or plumbing or all the places that need workforce development as well. But realize that on that previous slide, we had a lot of areas that are going to need additional folks. Make-ready construction, installations, customer service.
Christie, we will have you in to talk to us about being paid for.
Okay, happy.
Okay.
Thank you. The next thing I just want to mention is affordability. In the kingdom, we have the lowest income, but so does every town in the state. And we cannot lower our pricing in order to make things affordable. We need to have targeted programs. It is true that there's a lot of grant funding, and the more grant funding that comes in, the lower we can make our monthly costs. But a better option is to keep the costs at a point where anybody with a middle income can pay $80 a month or $100 a month. That's not a hardship if you've gotten to a middle income status. There's a lot of Vermonters that are in not only just the low income, but in the moderate income areas that fall off of that benefit cliff. We need to create programs for them, and we need to be able to have a pathway to that. So I want to make sure that there's time for additional questions and for other people. So I'll just reiterate that those are the things, the workforce, affordability, and staying.
We've got about 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Questions?
And I will say one more thing, just to go off on one of the things that Ellie said. The partners that we have in place, we're using Wadesfield Champlain Valley Telecom as our network operator and as our ISP. They enable us to get in and provide service to these folks from day one in a professional manner. We're using Velco and their fiber network and what's provided there, and they've been fantastic. So there's a lot of people and companies across the state that make these projects happen and possible.
Are you a municipality, a nonprofit, or one of those platypus-like arrangements, like the Board of New York?
All of the above. So we are a municipality. We are, as a communications district, we operate as a municipality under state law. We are inherently nonprofit as a municipality. We're formed out of municipalities that come into us, but you can't, because there's no taxing authority. The only borrowing authority we have is based on revenue bonds. So we can't tax, we can't get money from towns, and towns are not at risk of anything that we do.
Where's your money come from then?
So the money comes from three places, grant, financing, and the revenue that's generated off of what you build. So revenue can come from several places. For the most part, we're building this for retail Vermonters, but there are also wholesale opportunities. We have wholesale contracts on the dark fiber network, some of which we inherited and some of which we're creating. So it's important to keep thinking of the revenue streams that we can create as part of it.
But basically, traditionally, you would have had to borrow from a traditional bank until you got up enough fiber and enough customers and income to go to Wall Street for a bond. And that's where Easy Fiber was when the market crashed.
I think,
Yeah, we originally sold them on the idea that this would be an asset that would have value. But of course, when the market, failed, then we did try to approach local banks, but they were not interested. And so we went through this very complex process of doing private placement promissory notes. And that was that was tough. And Chris is right. Now there are 3 sources of income, but for us there were only ever 2. borrow and sell services. So, all our younger siblings, CUDs, we're delighted that the parents won the lottery and that there's a lot of money in the family now. And we don't begrudge that. Right now, we're like the only unsubsidized fiber network in Vermont, when you think about it.
And
I think,
so I just say you were fortunate in that you had people in your district with expertise and with cash they could invest to get up into the Northeast Kingdom.
There's no question it was a miraculous combination of people and time very often at our board meetings, you'll hear people say, keep working on the miracle, because that's really what it's been.
Gave us the model, and then we, recognizing that need to get out enough fiber, to get enough customers, set up a loan system in VITA, which the state underwrote the anticipated losses. But then COVID happened and the money came in. And I think there's only been one loan.
yeah, I can speak to the VITA. So the broadband loan expansion program with VITA provides for 3 years without any payments, whether that's interest or principal. It is still, it's still an interest rate that's based on market. We are approved for a $5 million VITA loan, which we needed to get in order to make our application to the USDA for the Reconnect grant. And that's the other point that I want to also reiterate is for us in this Reconnect grant, which is going to, if we get it, will serve Essex County where there are less than 5 people, not premises per square mile, not linear miles. So very remote, considered frontier and remote by the federal government.
The last frontier.
Frontier and remote, yeah, the last frontier. But we need a match for that, right? We need a non-federal match. I can't use the ARPA funds as a match because they're federal funds. Right, a non-federal match. And then the second thing is, as we see this BEAD funding come down, that is also going to require a non-federal match. And so the support that is going to be really necessary is finding those funds that can come from a state source to leverage the federal source, because it's going to be very difficult to otherwise come up with the match that's necessary. So there are multiple ways to do that. Obviously, the one that is advantageous is from a granting perspective. Another perspective is to consider the municipal revolving loan fund that is currently used by municipalities to build infrastructure, where it's a 0% loan rate, right? So that's not the same as a grant because we're gonna have to pay that money back, but it at least doesn't incur all those extra costs into the system. It's gonna be done with interest. Right, and that has a significant impact. And that impact, like if you think about 33%, 50%, 75%, like how far into the build can you get, and will you have that business case to go to the bond market and pay your 7% or your 8%? So the continued support for the project.
Okay, Christine, we'll have you in to talk to us about anything we may need to do in law. I've already got a couple people. And I'm forgetting one woman's name that's been working on the affordability. They had some programs, so we'll get those folks in and.
Holly Groshner with the Equal Access.
That's, yeah, I knew, I was coming up with Emily, it's Holly.
I meant to talk about that.
Okay. So we will get them in and start talking about how you've got to run the cable, but we've got to make it possible for your people in probably the least wealthiest county in the state, or some of them, to get, logged on.
Because if they can't afford it, they can't take service, and if they don't take service, then we can't support our operating costs.
Right.
So it's definitely a revolving circle.
Yes, okay. Other questions? Yes.
On a personal, I just want to say, having seen EC Fiber when it was first starting up, the whole idea of the community, connectivity struck me as always a good idea. And I was surprised to see it actually happen. It seemed to me that things were stacked against it. Senator McDonald will remember, us on this committee, railing against state policy.
I threw him out, was over in DC. 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah, but the sense that it made sense, but I didn't see it happen. It seemed like everything was stacked against it. And so this is great. to
It was
see
a leap of faith on everyone's part, and it, to date, is paying off, I think, better than any of us anticipated.
I'm assuming that in the Northeast Kingdom, you weren't draggled by a host of competitors. Fair statement?
Yes and no. So it's very interesting. We're a little bit more transparent with our build plans. We're building out our backbone first across the entire kingdom so that there's redundancy and so the entire kingdom has infrastructure. And some of our towns are contributing ARPA funds. We have over 10 towns that are contributing funds to add spurs to be sort of first in line. And one of those towns is the town of Westmore. And, the cable company decided that they were going to build. And when I talked to them, I said, I heard through a resident that you intend to come to Westmore. Is that true? And they said that they did indeed tend to come to Westmore. And I said, where in Westmore are you coming? And she said, well, we're coming to all of the places that you mentioned in your select board presentation. And so there is sometimes competition. And on one hand, you can look at that and say, well, the private company has made investment and those are dollars that I don't have to invest. But on the other hand, that's one area that had density that would have provided the revenue that exceeded the cost to invest in it. And so it's a catch-22. We want to avoid as much competition as we can. We have smaller donut holes than some of the other CUDs who have cable farther out and that just have the ends.
Okay. Yes, time.
But, so yes.
Well, the reason I ask is, if you look at our state telecommunications policy, there are a whole lot of policy goals in it, and some question whether or not the goals are realistic the way they're stated. And one of them says that one of our policy goals is to support competitive choice for consumers among telecommunications service providers and promote open access among competitive service providers on non-discriminatory terms to networks over which broadband and telecommunications services are delivered. Is that fair for what you do in the way that you do it, to have that policy exist?
Can I take that? Yeah. So I think, a key thing is that, EC Fiber's mission is that we're going to build every home and business in our district. And so that means that that means that we are building where Comcast exists, right? We're building where CCI exists. And we are bringing competitive choice. There would not be competitive choice if we were not doing our build.
Many of those places have no competitive choice, and this is particularly true.
Right, but now they have, but now they do.
They do because of what you've built.
The phone company and us. And I think the same thing is going to be true with all of the municipal CUDs going out and building out their networks, because ultimately they have to go and serve every home and business in their district. And that means that a lot of people who right now only have one choice or only have one realistic choice, say cable, they will now have a competitive choice. And I know you have $196 million worth of build that you need to do. And part of that is going to be overbuilding, those cable people eventually in that town, eventually,
Right, but
but not right
Yeah.
away. But I think there would be no mechanism within the state to create this kind of.
Well, I'm saying that a lot of those cases, from what I'm hearing, is that competitive choice really doesn't exist even with the CUDs, because the CUDs are the first on the scene. And my question is whether that statement in our policy is realistic at this point and whether or not it ought to be modified.
I think that we may have slightly different opinions on this issue. I do think that it's a very valid question and that it's an important one. Our $196 million bill is built to avoid cable, so our bill would be larger if it did include all of that. And the reason that having the CUDs in place is important is if we were funding actual private companies, we would be creating monopolies that would never have any accountability, would never have that accountability back. So it's not realistic for us to open our network as an open access network to everyone, to provide competition on that, because it would undermine our business policy. So in the areas where, the rurality is less than 10 people per mile, which is a large portion of the kingdom, that the reality is the entity that's funded is going to be the only entity that's going to be in there besides CCI. We have a lot of RDOF areas, some RDOF areas in our district as well. That's the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, which was the reverse auction that was done by the FCC. And we are working with both of the RDOF award winners to find ways to mutually work together and benefit each other. So I have regular conversations with Eric Garr from Consolidated/Fidium, as well as Michael Birnbaum from Para Networks. And we're trying to figure out ways to work together. But if you don't have competition, then the ability to have a public infrastructure that's like the cooperatives that were put out into these rural areas where those funds feed back into the community becomes really key.
Okay, we are at time, and I just want to check. I have Rob on the agenda.
No, that was me.
That was you.
And I was just coordinating for these guys, so they've
Okay.
spoken what we need to say.
I know it's not that Rob. Okay, so we will push end coil back. If we have to take a little time. Okay. Senator Bray.
Quick question. So it's good to see you again. It's a long time since the VGA did.
Yes.
We've plugged away at different things at different times that we're looking down the road. I think it's 10 years ago already. And here we wrote 100 in. We wrote on like 256K.
Right.
And the CUDs came along, Make Ready and LCAR. So I'm wondering what the next obstacle is and what should we be looking down the road at in terms of providing tools that let you keep on building out, or you feel like the CUD toolkit is pretty complete now?
I think that affordability is going to continue to be the biggest piece, that we can't rely on the federal government and the Affordable Connectivity Program. So solving that issue is going to be really important, and that's going to help us increase our take rates, and that's what's going to change that digital divide. Having a teacher that talked about how different the students in her classroom were after the pandemic and the differences. Some of that's probably because of physical, but part of that is because they couldn't afford to have the broadband. I think the other key pieces are going to remain funding support for the capital build-outs that get us to where we need to go. And I think part of that can be, the BEAD money that's coming down is going to be a huge impact. But part of it is creating revolving loans and mechanisms for that matching grants. We do have some, small pieces that can be helpful, like We're not currently a piece of, we're not currently allowed to participate in VEMR's, the Vermont Managed Retirement System, because we're not listed. So, you know, there's some simple things like that. And I think the workforce development can't be understated. I'll just go on the record again, it cannot be understated how much of a problem that's going to be in about a year to maybe 18 months. Maybe we've got about that much time before people around, states around us, around the country are clamoring for folks and pulling people away. And what is that going to do to the pricing? What is that going to do to our cost, our construction cost? But are we going to be able to like hold on to those people? We have a contract with Eustis for our build out, and we've written into that because they were able to do it. 95% of our workers are coming from the Northeast Kingdom. And we were able to do that with Eustis because 30 to 40% of their entire workforce actually resides in the Northeast Kingdom. But our goal is to use those workers, retain local workforce, and try to, we're actually holding, they're basically sort of like training sessions or PEP sessions. They're a little bit of both on safety, but also on, here's what you're doing for your community. Like, here's the difference that you're making. You know, this company can now sell baked goods online and post pictures and take orders that couldn't a month ago.
Just if I may,
Yeah,
I have a couple things I'd like to add to that as well. I agree with everything she said, but one other thing that relates to affordability is that people who are just above the income level of which they qualify for ACP, some people may be retired and just above the income level. So that's a problem of people who are very, because there's a cliff there. And then the other thing related is the cost of what we call drops. So we've been talking a lot about the process to build mainline fiber down the roads. But if you live particularly far from the road, then our business models can support a certain amount of covering that capital, but beyond that, typically it's for the subscriber's account. And if that subscriber can't afford to cover the delta, that then becomes a problem as well.
One of the things to
Put money
consider,
into that, but it was one time.
That's one. Thanks. We've talked about, and I'm wondering about connections to schools. One of the things that's been talked about for a long time is that what you can learn in a very small rural school, you might have access to a foreign language, for instance, or EP physics, or whatever it is. And there's been this concept floated around for a long time about the best physics teacher in Vermont being able to teach kids no matter where they are through a high-speed symmetrical network. And has that become a reality?
Not yet, but that's something that EC Fiber is particularly interested in, because now we really have a network that's covering this whole area. And increasingly at our board meetings, questions are being raised. What are we doing with this? What can we do with this network, in the community? And I also want to say that the toolkit's pretty good. We're well up that mountain trail, right? The issue is maybe we don't have enough people who are helping climbers, the workforce issue. And I'm not sure that I'm not sure that there's an answer in legislation, but you have given us a fabulous set of tools and a fabulous set of supplies. And I can't tell you how crucial the work to set up the Vermont Community Broadband Fund was.
the one other piece I'd mention is on housing. So there's going to be a lot of investment in affordable housing, super critical. And one of the things that would be helpful at an appropriate place is the requirement that funding come with a requirement to install the conduit when it's being built. So the most difficult places that we have are manufactured housing parks. And those are pretty much all underground. So as we develop more of those parks in order to, because we've got the efficiency, the modular efficiency homes, as those go out and get installed, you can come to us as a CUD and I will supply the conduit that goes in there, but we need to request that that conduit go in at installation. It's in orders of magnitude cheaper to do it at the same time. And the same thing for multifamily housing.
Senator Rosensdale, head of the Housing Committee, is listening. And there's two other members on that committee sitting in this room, so
We're writing it down right now.
I already have, so.
So conduit's really important. there's-
And
there's
that's
other
the
efforts like-
underground, 'cause-
yeah.
okay, because we looked at underground utilities in this city and decided the only thing we could afford was to put in the conduits as we were going up the
That's right.
street, because the individual hookups were just astronomically.
And we work with our
expensive.
utilities. GMP has been fantastic. They, Amy will call up and say, hey, we're gonna be in this facility in 2 weeks. We're gonna, go underground across the interstate, or we're gonna, do this. Do you want in? And we're like, yeah, we're there, and we just go in and put our conduit in. Sometimes we put in some vaults or some handholds.
It's easier to do it then than have to dig up the interstate.
And the key thing about fiber is it needs to be in conduit down a couple of feet. Unlike cable, unlike telephone, unlike even electric service, there are places where I have found all three of those, just a slit in 6 inches of soil right on top of ledge.
That's why we
Right.
have safety.
And that's okay. They don't mind because those wires are copper
Okay.
and the fiber is glass. So it's a different kettle of fish. There's some interesting products out there now, direct berry fiber. And EC Fiber is going to start experimenting with that. But at the end of the day, there's nothing like digging a trench, putting in a conduit and having the
Unless
fiber. in
there's
the conduit.
granite ledge.
Yeah,
We
don't like that so much.
Not that there's any granite ledge in Vermont.
Why do the new poles have to be so high? So much higher than the old ones.
So it depends on where you're looking. Generally speaking, it depends on whether or not it's carrying transmission line as well as distribution line for the electric utilities. So that's one of the issues. But the other issue is if you're, investing in putting in a new pole, then you want to make sure that it has the capacity to. So I don't think that they're too much higher, but we're looking at 45-foot poles sometimes. I mean, that I think is sometimes 50.
Well, I'm not gonna take up.
Do you have, do you have any other?
Yeah, we mandated 45-foot poles in 2007. So
Okay.
that's the replacement stock, but they need to be high enough to keep the lowest cable 18 foot clear from the roadway. So that's really the bottom line, is you don't want tractor trailer trucks looking the wire.
And then you need to have plenty of room between, the neutral. and-
Yep, 40 inches
The
from the
safety
neutral
issues.
space. Yep.
Safety.
Yeah, and you never
It's
know,
all
like,
defined in the National Electrical Safety Code.
and then you want sensibility too.
Okay, I've got one more question and then we have another witness. I hope he was coming down from the airport, but
His flight got delayed, so we'll be submitting.
he's not coming.
He is, but he'll be here via Zoom.
Oh, via Zoom. Okay. So he can wait a few minutes.
In the interest of time,
Just cut.
I'll just frame my question more as a statement, and if you want to react, and it ties on to your housing piece, but I also want to pick up, I heard you say, Ellie, that this is the gospel of CUD. For me, you're preaching to the choir. I think this is great to put the public interest in all of these decisions about getting service to those 60,000 households. This is exactly what we should be doing. My question has to do with any secondary benefits we might be seeing, and when we're laying the fiber out to these areas, are you seeing increased property values and more investments? Are you seeing quality of life? Are you seeing people wanting to spend more? Maybe even some housing development growth, not that we necessarily want it way out in the rural areas, but higher concentrated density development. Are you seeing it follow the path of the fiber?
So I will do a quick answer, and then I think FX is probably the best person to respond to that. But in the Northeast Kingdom, we saw a loss of population when the rest of Vermont grew. And I will wager that it is because of the broadband issue, because people simply couldn't. So 2020, we had a lower population than 2010, and I think that's the reason why. They just didn't have that economic piece. We've had businesses as part of our business development grant that, they're just so thrilled that they can do things that they could never do before. So it's a massive impact, and it's going to have continuing reverberation beyond economics, whether it's cellular and small cells, whether there's a lot of different places where it's going to come into play.
Yeah, what we saw during the pandemic was that we were hearing stories back from the field of people who had EC fiber service in place. The house was getting a $10,000 or $20,000 premium, right? And that was heartening to hear. Maybe not so good thinking about where the tax rate's going to go. But
We're working on that.
but the fact is that anecdotally, at least at EC Fiber, with the 2,000, well, almost 3,000 customers that we've added since the beginning of the pandemic. So many of the stories that our staff has relayed back to us, that we've heard from neighbors, that we've heard from people that we meet, it's like, oh my God, we had to get out of the city. Now we can live in our house full time, yada, yada. Well, everything that you would imagine, it's really true. And that's why I say, this infrastructure, that when we get this built out in the state, it's going to serve us very well. I think it's going to help Vermont stay Vermont as our population increases dramatically because of climate people, right? If we get this infrastructure in now, it's going to create a lot of opportunity to do a lot of community-based things, like the best physics teacher in Vermont, having a class full of kids from all around Vermont. That'll really help keep Vermonti Vermonti. That'll allow us to continue to do things the Vermont way. Because that I think is the biggest long-term threat we face.
And that school connectivity is one of our top goals.
I can't remember, do you provide backhaul for cell? And is that a requirement or just a business application?
Our situation is that we do have dark fiber agreements with a number of different businesses. We do some cellular backhaul. We're very excited with this, the Mac Mountain people. In fact, the guy behind it, Alec Bozek, he was on our board out of Woodstock for a while. And you really need to have fiber generally available for their concept to work. And we see it as a complementary piece, not as a competitive piece. So
Is it a revenue source?
it would be.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a couple pieces on this. We also have dark fiber agreements with companies like First Light and whatnot, and those are primarily came from the state network. We do exchange fiber agreements with some folks. We're going across the interstate with First Light. So there's things like that that we can do together to work together. There is a degree to which the main folks like an AT&T or someone like that are not going to be ready to sign on to a communications union district for some years because they want, first of all, they have a First Light. First Light will literally build out just to build a tower for them. And we can't prove that we can do the nines. We can't get to 99.999% until we can prove that. And so without that experience underway, it's unlikely that we'll get the large carriers. I also worked with the Vermont Telecom Authority on small cell projects. I know the challenges that are there and can talk to that, not here, but I think that we continue to look for opportunities where it's a possibility because it can support our business case. But depending on what they're looking for, we're not necessarily going to be able to compete with a First Light or something like that.
You're causing a certain amount of PTSD for me, man.
I know, right?
The corridor through Huntington all the way to Jerusalem. I don't think anyone gets service here.
Any other questions? Anything else? I think you've given us enough. We will be looking at affordability and see where we can go from there. Any thoughts about things that we can do to make things better? Let us know. Christine know, she'll let us know. And it's really thrilling to see how far this has come since it was just EC Fiber. And they were kind of, what?
Yeah, we really appreciate the support that we've gotten from the legislature and the faith that's been put in our, and we all, Janelle is the executive director for CV Fiber. She's here as well. Sean is the executive director for Northwest.
Okay, and Linda?
CV Fiber.
Yeah, I know CV is here.
And we know the responsibility that's on our shoulders and we're ready to step
But
up.
I don't
Rob's
think,
our executive director for the CUDA.
okay,
Okay, so, and he's been fantastic. He's
Yeah,
really helped
he's
us
really super.
step up our game, so.
well, that's, I think,
And Matt's helping us represent us in the State House so that we have a face and a guide.
okay, well, I think all the guiding is going well. Senator McDonald, have the Marshall Islands ceased to exist, or are they becoming a little more populated? In the early days, he had a map, and Orange County had nothing. And this is when our director was, his name the Marshall Islands.
I was just saying, from the Marshall Islands.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Come a long, long way.
yeah, thank you for
This is really good.
your leadership
Good
on
to
this.
see you.
Hi, Al. Person again.
Yes, I was gonna say, I don't know that we've ever seen it.
That is a truism.
Okay, committee, what is the status with our next guest? Okay, then we will hear from him. Here's my committee. Okay, we're cleared out. Senator Ron Hinsdale, if you want to come down. Okay, we're aired. Don't I have? Senator Gray probably won't go. Okay, we have a presentation coming from NCOIL, which is the Conference of Insurance Legislators. It's a national organization. Representative Keenan was the president 18 years ago. She twisted one of our arms, but we pay dues. We have set representatives. They set up model laws that deal with a lot of the insurance issues. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
This is the story for all of the CUDs. What you heard today was from two.
Well, where's the press?
Actually, the press approached me and then decided that they gave it to somebody else in press. So I don't know if we're gonna get the press that we thought we were
Let
gonna.
me pick it up
We are about to
electronically.
sign into an NCOIL rep, so
Good.
you're welcome to stay.
But
We've taken, yeah, we've taken 20 minutes out of his time. So good.
so much.
Thank
Your
you,
support
guys.
is completely appreciated.
Good. We'll get.
Yeah, the workforce issue, getting the real problem.
All right, and I know, I mean, there wasn't a Vermont truck in Vermont laying cable last year. They were laying it through my backyard, yeah, and I think they were from North Dakota or South Carolina.
We got Eustis trucks.
Yeah.
Now.
Started a
We have
couple-
started construction here
Started
in
a couple-
Washington County now.
Good.
Yeah. So hopefully
Yeah,
by
so he's no longer
the
the
first 6
director.
months here, we'll get some subscribers going too.
Thank you for all the hard work.
Well, you know what? Buggy whip guys had to do something.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Okay. So no, we are bringing in the NCOIL and we're getting the break. He is recruiting. I haven't gone back. I left when I left the insurance committee. Senator Botzau, Representative Botzau, and Kitzmiller were regular attendees. They are gone. And so they are really looking, the DFR will pay your expenses if you go.
I'm sorry, so when is this, what is this, and do you want me
Well,
to go?
I will let Mr. Milovchik talk to you. I know they talked to those of us that went to the NAIC, just, it's a guest legislators thing, come see what we do. They talked to us there because they were having their meeting in town at the same time. So, Will, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, are you at an airport? I know you were flying in.
Yeah, actually, we were at the air. Yeah, we were planning on being there in person, but our flight was delayed. So we're actually at a hotel right across the street from the airport because we couldn't find a quiet room there at the airport. So we don't get in until about 8 o'clock tonight. So I know it's great to meet in person, but there's times like this where technology does prove to be very valuable.
It does, yeah. Okay, so the floor is yours. I'm expecting 2 more members back here, but they escaped. So I expect they will be back in shortly.
Okay, great. Well, would you like to me to get started, or would you like to wait for the other members?
Yes, yeah. No, we don't wait. This is,
Okay,
we start on time. It's their loss.
great. So I'm gonna have some slides here that I'll just share. There we go. And there. So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. I will say, as I mentioned, I was planning on being there in person, but tomorrow we are scheduled to have a broader presentation along with an academic from the Institute's Griffith Foundation, which will be an intro to NCOIL and also a little bit of insurance 101 training. So if anyone is interested and available for tomorrow with the House Commerce and Economic Development Committee, that will start around 9 a.m. But I'm
The Senate has 2 committees a day, and we are all in another committee tomorrow. And our
Okay.
committees frequently only have 5 people, so it's hard to sneak out.
all right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, but I think we're getting a delay.
Okay. Well,
Okay,
I'll try to keep going. And so I'll introduce myself. I'm Will Milovchik. I'm NCOIL's general counsel. And what I'd like to do today, as the chair mentioned, is just provide a little bit of background on NCOIL for those who aren't familiar with it, and to really just encourage you to get involved with the organization, as it is very valuable for legislators such as yourselves who serve on their state's committee with jurisdiction over insurance issues. So the National Council of Insurance Legislators, we are a national bipartisan legislative organization founded in 1969, and we are represented by legislators such as yourselves, as I mentioned, who serve on their state committees with jurisdiction over insurance issues. And what makes NCOIL unique is that we are the only national legislative laws in insurance. And a lot of our model laws have been very successful and adopted by Vermont and other states across the country. And some examples include when Uber and Lyft came to our lives and insurance requirements had to be developed for them, NCOIL developed a model law that has been adopted by almost every state now. And another example is NCOIL has a model law that regulates the use of personal credit information in insurance underwriting, and that's been adopted by nearly 40 states. And Vermont was actually one of the latest states to do so in the past few years or so. And one of NCOIL's primary missions is to preserve the state jurisdiction over insurance which was set forth by Congress in the McCarran-Ferguson Act of 1945. So insurance, as you likely know, is one of those industries that is by and large regulated at the state level. And a little bit of history there is that insurance, going back to around 1940s, insurance was regulated by the states, but then there was a Supreme Court case that said insurance was interstate commerce, and therefore it was going to be subject to federal regulation. But then Congress actually stepped in very quickly and passed the McCarran-Ferguson Act, which said that insurance should be regulated by the states. It's not interstate commerce. And really, if you look at the timing there, right around 1945, Congress and the United States had some very important things going on overseas. So they said, I think, we'll let the states handle this for now. But it has proven to be a very smart decision, as the U.S. insurance industry is the largest, most competitive and innovative market in the world. And in addition to preserving the state-based system, NCOIL strives to be an educational forum for public policymakers and interested parties, so that legislators are kept up to speed on the current insurance issues as when they return to their state legislatures. So a little bit of information on how NCOIL is structured. All 50 states are members of NCOIL, but certain states that pay NCOIL financial dues are termed contributing member states. And Vermont, I'm happy to say, is one of those states. And Vermont actually has a very long and active history in NCOIL. Former Representative Kathleen Keenan was a former NCOIL president many years ago. And then former Representative Bill Botsow, he was actually scheduled to be NCOIL president, only going on about 5 or so years ago. But then he actually retired from the legislature when he was NCOIL vice president. And then sad to say, Representative Warren Kitzmiller, who recently passed away, he was a longtime NCOIL participant and an NCOIL executive committee member. So we're sad to see him go, but he's a great illustration of the long history that Vermont has at NCOIL. And NCOIL has several policy committees broken down by each line of insurance. So we have a health insurance committee, property and casualty insurance, life insurance, and so on and so forth. And those committees meet at our national meetings 3 times per year. And we also have interim Zoom meetings of the policy committees occasionally. And at these meetings, the policy committees, they discuss and they develop model laws, and they hear educational presentations, as I mentioned, on what the current and timely issues are in the insurance marketplace. And going back to the distinction between how all 50 states are members of NCOIL, but states that pay financial dues are contributing members. So one of the main benefits of being a legislator from a contributing member state is that you're able to participate in the stipend program. And what that means is a certain amount of funds is taken from the state dues payment, and it pays travel expenses for the legislators to come to our national meetings. And the way that breaks down is there's 2 stipends available for each of our 3 national meetings, and they're valued at approximately $1,500, including the registration fee. And then we also have another way of getting legislators involved, predominantly reserved for legislators that are from non-contributing states, and that's our scholarship program. So it functions very similar to our stipend program, but the scholarships are generally reserved for legislators attending their first or second NCOIL meeting to kind of try out NCOIL. And if you're from a contributing state, let's say if there's more than 2 legislators that come from that state to a national meeting, then you can still get a scholarship. They're not exclusively reserved for legislators from non-contributing states. So our first national meeting of 2023 is right around the corner in San Diego, as you see, from March 9th to 12th. Our summer meeting is in Minneapolis, July 19th to 22nd, and our fall meeting is in Columbus, Ohio, from November 15th to 18th. And at our conferences, we typically range from anywhere from $275 to 375 total attendees, which ranges from 50 to all the way up to 70 legislators from across the country. And we also generally have at least a handful of state insurance commissioners attend our meetings, all the way up to, we set our attendance record at our most recent summer meeting where we had 12 insurance commissioners attend. And that was really a great time to be involved with NCOIL. In 2022, you see here, we had 109 legislators attend NCOIL national meetings, along with 20 insurance commissioners. And at our last national meeting, which was in New Orleans, the week before Thanksgiving, we set an attendance record, an NCOIL attendance record, where we had almost 400 attendees, close to 70 legislators, and about 10 insurance commissioners. And another important characteristic of NCOIL, and something that we're very proud of, is that we really are bipartisan and representative of America. And we do make efforts to further strengthen those characteristics. So, for example, some numbers here you see on the slides. At our summer meeting this past July, we had 27 Republicans and 21 Democrats attend, which is close to a 50-50 split. And then we also had 23 legislators of gender or racial diversity attend, representing almost half the total. And then we also have an informal practice, meaning that it's not in our bylaws, but we always alternate political party affiliation representation for NCOIL, for who serves as NCOIL president. So right now, our president is a state representative from Arkansas who is a Democrat. And then next year, we have a state representative from Texas who is a Republican who will be president. And then the year after that will be Assemblywoman Pam Hunter, a Democrat from New York. And after that, Senator Paul Efke, a Republican from Minnesota. So that really, it's another characteristic that makes NCOIL unique and really provides more credibility to the organization as a whole, because when model laws are passed out of NCOIL and state legislators see them, they know that all sides, all perspectives were heard, and legislators from both sides of the aisle voted on this and approved it. So that's all I have for now. As you see my contact information there. I'm happy to take any questions if you have any. But if not, I really encourage you to get involved with the organization. I can also provide some information to Jill, who I was speaking with, in terms of the stipend and scholarship material. And we'd hope to see you as soon as San Diego in March. And if not San Diego, then one of our remaining national meetings for the rest of the year. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? I did chair the workers' comp committee at one point, and I was in line for the executive committee, but didn't make it that year.
I
Okay,
mentioned the 9th. How long does it go?
2 days. 3 days.
3 days.
Yeah. And they do work you right through lunch. I think the executive committee meets at 7:30 in the morning, at least they used to. It's not a junket. It's a full service week. Yeah. Okay. I don't see any. Thank you. Look us up when you're in the building tomorrow. And good luck with your flight.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting you in person. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.